Hello, this is part two of my series on quitting smoking or quitting nicotine. And so I'll start out telling you my name is John Flannery. I'm a practicing physician. I smoked for a good 30 years and finally succeeded in quitting all forms of nicotine around the age of 50. And it was only by the grace of God and coming to some understanding about addiction and a plan on how to succeed in quitting that I was able to do so. So in this tape I want to talk to you about addiction, and it really applies to any type of addiction, but it's going to be aimed mainly at addiction to nicotine. Okay, so if you understand the concept of hunger and craving something sweet, then you already are understanding the basics of addiction. Because addiction to nicotine is simply a short-circuiting of the hardware inside your brain that God put there for a good reason. He put hunger and craving in there so that we would continue eating adequately and eating the right things, and also for procreation, the purpose of procreation. So if we didn't have hunger and craving in us, the species wouldn't go on. But unfortunately, those centers of the brain that are responsible for hunger and cravings, the so-called pleasure centers of the brain, get taken over when you become addicted. And so when you develop addiction to nicotine, through the constant use of nicotine, the receptors in your brain that nicotine attaches itself to multiply, and then if you suddenly take away the nicotine, you experience a great inner hunger for nicotine, and that inner hunger is called withdrawal. It's painful. It's not painful necessarily like hunger for food, but nevertheless it is a painful experience. And any of you that have ever tried to quit know what I'm telling you is the truth. In my case, whenever I tried to quit smoking or went for any period of time without it, I became irritable, became nervous, I became grouchy. I wasn't a very good social person to be around. I found myself being intolerant of others and beginning to even hate myself. I began to experience difficulty focusing. I would have frequent yawning, and I've come to understand that all of these were the basic symptoms of withdrawal. And so when I would experience that and then light up and get some nicotine in me, all those horrible feelings would go away, and I came to believe in my heart of hearts that nicotine was good for me. I began to believe that it made me feel better, that it helped me to focus, that that it made my life much better. And so it wasn't long before I was equating smoking with helping me. And I've come to understand that was part of the insanity of addiction, that people who become addicted begin to believe in what they're addicted to as something that's helpful to them. I've heard people say things like, it's like my friend, or it's a crutch I lean on, or it's something that helps me get through hard times. But the reality of the matter is that it helps you get through withdrawals. And that's pretty much the long and short of it. True, when I first started smoking, I got a tremendous buzz from it. But I have to honestly say that for the last 20 or so years of smoking, maybe more, I never experienced those buzzes that I did when I first started. So mostly the joy I got from smoking was that it was relieving my withdrawals. Okay, so anything that you become addicted to, if you take it away, the basics of addiction are that if you take away what you have developed this tolerance to, you will have some form of withdrawal. And everybody's a little different. Some experience tremendous withdrawals. Some of the withdrawals aren't really that bad. But the second part of addiction is craving. And I want to remind you that craving's put there by God for a purpose. If you let children, they say this, that if you let children choose the foods that they desire or crave, they will actually pick a balanced diet. And I'm not sure that's entirely true, having watched my little yard apes grow up eating all the junk food that they ate. But I can relate to the fact that when you crave food, you will eat. So craving is there for a purpose, and that is to make us take the time out to eat when we need to. Unfortunately, we can develop some excesses of craving with eating, and that results in us developing obesity. And overeating is actually also utilizing the same areas of the brain that are responsible for addiction in a harmful way. So, what is craving? Anybody that has had a craving, and that's all of us, if you've ever thought about them, it's a preoccupation in our mind that we must get something. We must get a cigarette, we must get a piece of pie, we must have a sexual encounter, or any other thing that we might be addicted to, drugs of various forms. Medical science has unraveled some of the mystery of this addiction and craving, and it turns out that when a person develops a craving, that this can be measured. There's different types of scanning that can be done to visualize the process of a craving taking place. And by measuring this process, it's been learned that cravings, and I don't think you'll find this a big surprise, that cravings last about 15 minutes. So if you have a craving and you leave the craving to itself, it will burn itself out in about 15 minutes. And it doesn't matter what you're addicted to, that cravings only last that period of time. And I like to think of cravings in a visual way to help me understand them. So I think of craving as a spinning top. If you ever have played with a top, you know that once you give that top a spin and it starts twirling around, it will spin on the table for a period of time and finally fall over. You can do this with a coin or any object, really. You can start it spinning, and that, as long as that momentum, that circular momentum is there, that top will keep turning until it finally wears out and then will fall over. Or you could think of craving as a little pile of leaves that you set on fire. It dissipates over time, but in the process it burns, it gives off energy. You can measure it, you can feel it. And so a craving is a process that takes place in the brain that lasts about 15 minutes. It can be measured, it can be observed, and in all cases, cravings go away on their own in about 15 minutes. So what exactly is a craving? Well, craving is a process that makes you aware that you want something. You want that food, you want that pie, you want that cigarette or whatever. And not only that, the craving is like a screaming baby in your head. It's something that you can't ignore. If you've ever tried to ignore a baby that's crying, you'll know that that's a very difficult thing to do. And I'm not telling you ever to do that. But if you think of your mind as an infant and your brain as a screaming child when you go into a craving, then that can just help you to visualize what's going on. So when you start craving, if you just simply try to ignore it, it's going to scream louder. And that's because craving is put there for a purpose. It's so that we can't set aside the urge to eat and to procreate. That it's important to do these things or we'll die, you know. And as I said earlier, addiction is a short-circuiting of that part of our brain. And so when you get a craving to smoke, if you don't have any mechanism of dealing with it, it's going to keep tickling your brain. And sooner or later, if you're like me, you'll give into that fanciful thinking, that those obsessive thoughts, and it will drive you nuts, and you may give into a craving. Okay, well, that's the basics right there. Addiction is a process that results from continued use of a substance that you can develop tolerance to. The mechanism for tolerance maybe isn't very well understood, but we know that nicotine attaches to receptors in our brain, and that when we continue to use it, the number of receptors for nicotine increase. These receptors are linked to the same part of our brain where endorphins and opiates attach, and they stimulate centers in our brain that are associated with pleasure. And then if you do this long enough, you eventually will build up so many of these receptors that when you suddenly try to take away the nicotine, you're going to go into a state of withdrawal, which is analogous to hunger pains, but it's a different kind of pain depending on what you're addicted to. And then coupled with that dependency is a craving for the substance. It's a rather insane thing. I don't know if you've ever done this. I have. I've actually lit up a second cigarette when I was smoking because my brain was still craving, and without thinking, I just responded to that craving and lit up a second cigarette. If you look at the world of eating, the analogy would be that you maybe had a craving to eat some pie and you were hungry and you commenced eating until you filled your stomach up, but you were still craving, and so you continued to eat that pie even though your stomach was full, and then you found that you had a bellyache from eating too much pie. So craving is a driving force, and if you eat based on craving, you may end up overeating. But nevertheless, it is what brings to our mind that we need to eat, and it's what brings us to our mind that we want a cigarette. And so one final reminder that even though you become addicted to nicotine or you become addicted to any substance, if you can understand these basic concepts, you can develop some techniques on how to quit. And that's what I learned. And when I developed the techniques that I needed to learn how to quit, I put those techniques into action. And I'm happy to tell you that it was a relatively short period of time that I succeeded in suppressing my cravings and not suffering like I had in the past when I tried to ignore cravings. So I want you to nurture in your mind that desire to quit smoking. I want you to get some faith and hope that you can do so. And the next step will be discussed in the third video, which is how can you actually now put these steps into effect and quit smoking. Okay, Happy New Year to you. And thanks for listening. Please use the comment boxes to put in comments about what you think about this video. Share your experiences on quitting. Others will hopefully benefit from your experiences. If you don't like this video, I don't mind if you put those comments down too, but please be nice. Don't say anything mean or nasty to try to hurt my feelings or anybody else's feelings. That's not going to help anyone. Okay? Thank you very much.